Yesterday was day 16 of the Karen Read trial. I'm going to give you my daily recap. Just woke up in Florida, I'm getting ready for the day, and I have to get this recap to you before testimony starts today because it never stops. Maureen Hartnett is still on the stand. She's being questioned by Alessi, and she is the crime scene lab tech that did a bunch of testing on John O'Keefe's clothing and on the taillight. The first question that Alessi wants to know is if she found any sand or salt inside of the taillight because it was cracked. It had traveled from Dighton to Canton, and it had sat outside during the snowstorm, so he wanted to know, and she said no. We get into the sweatshirt and the t-shirt, and he wants to know about the debris and the debris scrapings that she did. They were both packaged together in the same bag, so she dumped the entire bag with both garments out onto her space, and she said she did not look over the debris, she just put it into packaging. There's very brief cross-exam by Hank Brennan, and then we're going to get into the next witness, who's Dr. Irini Scorti-Bello. She is the medical examiner. She's being questioned by Hank Brennan, and this is the Commonwealth's medical examiner. She works for the state, so it's no question that she would be called. I do think overall that her testimony, it helped the defense in the end, but it would have looked really poorly if the Commonwealth did not call her to the state. We start talking about John O'Keefe's injuries. First of all, the injuries on his face. He had a right upper eyelid 1 centimeter laceration. He had abrasions and scrapes on the left aspect of his nose. He also had bruising on his right hand. We'll get into exactly what was talked about with the hand. And then we've seen this picture a million times. It is graphic, but he had, she calls them multiple abrasions and lacerations ranging from 2 to 3 millimeters up to 7 centimeters, where the bigger ones are on this side. This is John O'Keefe's leg. He had a small scrape on the side of his right knee, and that is pretty much the extent of his injuries, except for the back of his head. He has a laceration with an abrasion on the back of his head. We're not shown that picture. She also says that there are some skull injuries with the injury on the back of his head, and she did a toxicology report. There was no illicit drugs in his system, but he did have a blood alcohol level. I missed what that was if she did say it. And then we get into cause of death and manner of death. So when she's doing the autopsy report, these are two things that are part of her job. Within 90 days, she has to issue the autopsy report for the family. The cause of death was blunt impact injuries of head and hypothermia. And then she's saying that the blunt impact was the primary cause of death. Hypothermia wouldn't have killed him alone. In the absence of the head trauma, hypothermia is the cause of death, but because we have the blunt injury of the head in this case, that's the main reason. His body temp was 80.1, normal temp is 98.6. The manner of the death could not be determined. Earlier, she had explained the options. There's 5 of them. It's natural causes, homicide, accidental, suicide, or undetermined. She entered the death certificate and issued that was issued right after the autopsy, and the final death certificate is entered into evidence. She can always go back and amend the death certificate too if she finds new information that changes from undetermined to homicide or vice versa. She could go in and change that. We have Mr. Alessi doing the cross-exam of Dr. Irini Scorti-Bello, and we are basically explaining that medical examiners are not in charge of the investigation. Her job is not to investigate the crime further, but she does get information from the investigators, obviously, to help rule with her conclusions. So Alessi goes down the path of questioning, like, you wouldn't want a neurosurgeon to do an autopsy, right? Like, and you wouldn't do a brain surgery. And it's just kind of laying the foundation for the fact that you need to have the proper training to do this. One of the biggest moments from this day of testimony was this photo that we have never seen, that we didn't know existed. And it's a picture of 2 police officers here in the morgue during the autopsy. She is like, oh, I've never seen this picture, but this was an accurate representation of what was happening the day of the autopsy for John O'Keefe in Sandwich in the morgue. That is Connor Keefe. That is Michael Proctor. We'll get to that later though. I also want to point out that on day 11 of testimony, Connor Keefe, this Mass State police officer, testified that he was alone and he was the only member of law enforcement to attend the autopsy. Issued her final report on April 14th. They try to do that within the 90-day window, and she did work with Dr. Stonebridge, who is triple board certified, to examine John O'Keefe's brain. We start getting some questions about hypothermia. Because Mr. O'Keefe was found in the snow and his body temp was 80 degrees, did you conclude he died of hypothermia as one of the causes? She says, after seeing some findings that were consistent with that and the info that he was found in the snow that she received from the ambulance paramedics, she came to the conclusion that was one of the things that contributed. Are there other reasons that he would have had a body temp of 80 degrees? She said in this situation, there are no other circumstances. It was because he was in the snow. Did you consider that he could have died somewhere else and been placed in the snow? And then there's an objection in a sidebar, and we have to move along. The judge doesn't want them to have the sidebar, but then she ends up agreeing to it. And it's kind of like, you've never said no to Brennan when he's asked for a sidebar. So why are you saying no to Alessi? Alessi wants to know if she played through any alternate scenarios to come up with the cause and manner of death for John O'Keefe. And she said at the time of the autopsy, she documented the injuries and the signs of hypothermia. She was provided the set of circumstances, but at the end of the investigation, she could not determine a manner. So basically within that 90-day window, she never came up with a manner of death. Like I said, she could go back and amend that, but she must not have found something that has changed her mind on that. She doesn't come up with the hypothetical scenarios. She just has to work with the evidence that's provided. Alessi changes gears a little bit and wants to know if John O'Keefe would have been rendered unconscious had he sustained this head injury, and like how quickly he would have been unconscious. And she says she can't say how quickly it would have been, but that this would have incapacitated him. The image of John O'Keefe's back of the head is shown, and he wants to know if falling back into the snow or the grass would have produced this type of injury, or if it would have been a more circular injury. And she says that a fall back would produce this injury. She did not see any evidence of grass in the back of the head. And there is a little J mark, I guess, in the picture of the back of the head. And she said she did note it, but she only observed the injury as a whole. They take their lunch break, and when they come back, she's asked about the death notification report from the hospital, and she's refreshed her memory with the report. She says that the notification stated that an adult male sustained injuries may have been in an altercation, and there's an objection, we're moved to strike. But this is information that was a part of the investigation. I don't understand why it's not allowed to be out there. At the end of Alessi's questioning, he gets really scientific and he starts questioning about the gastric and pancreatic hemorrhages that were present. He's alluding to the fact that he could have been in an altercation and sustained those from bruising, from a fight. And in the grand jury, she had testified that he had died in a different environment where temps weren't that low, that there would have been an explanation for those. But I guess some of those gastric hemorrhages could be present because of the hypothermia. There was a point where they published a photo of John O'Keefe's stomach and the inside of his stomach where you can see those ulcers, I believe. And then Brennan asked for the jury to take a break. The judge had warned that it was graphic, but apparently it was. We come back, and Alessi wants to know if he had any frostbite. She says there was no frostbite. She knows the weather circumstances. His hands and other extremities showed no signs of that. The main takeaway from today was he asked, did you know any injuries on John O'Keefe that were consistent with a car accident? And she said she did examine the lower extremities. She did not see any evidence of an impact site. She did not observe any bleeding or broken bones in the lower legs, and that is something that would be consistent with a car accident. Do you believe that the eyelid laceration was from falling back and hitting their head? So the injury here, and she says that's not how he would have sustained it. That injury would have had to happen in another way. If you fall back and hit the back of your head, you can't get an injury on the front of the face, she says. Alessi gets her to say that it is consistent with a punch. And we're gonna go to part 2 for the end of the cross.